This is Chicago, the third largest city in the United States and a town that I briefly called home. Chicago has lots to offer, and millions of tourists flock to the Windy City every year. Many of these tourists visit all the same few destinations, which is fine, but the city has so much beauty and interesting history in places where people don't always think to look. Take this church, for example. The Chicago Temple is 586 feet or 173 meters tall, housing the First United Methodist Church of Chicago. When it opened in 1924, it claimed the title of tallest building in Chicago, which it held onto for 6 years. Some people say that this is the tallest church in the world. Others argue that since part of the building is dedicated to office space, the tallest church in the world is the Minster in Ulm, Germany. The disputed record is interesting enough. But when you take an elevator from the main sanctuary up to the bottom of the spire, past the lounge chairs on the balcony, and climb up several narrow flights of stairs, you'll find yourself in the Sky Chapel. This sanctuary, located in the steeple, can seat 30 people. But what sets it apart from other churches is not only its height. Look closely at the stained glass and you will see depictions of streetcars and trains. The Chicago Temple is one of only a few known examples of modern public transportation being depicted on stained glass. In today's video, I want to show you another such spot, an interesting piece of history in an unassuming place. Did you know that if you go for a ride on the CTA Brown Line, you can get off at a station and find a slab of the Berlin Wall? Find out where, and discover why the Brown Line is my favorite out of all the L lines. Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new Trains Are Awesome video. I'm Tom, and I'm standing at Quincy Station on the Loop here in Chicago. Quincy Station was remodeled to look more like the original L stations back in the 1890s. Now, in my year living here in Chicago, I've done quite a few videos about the L. It's an iconic transit system. And of course, like I'm sure many transit fans do, I've actually ranked all the lines based on personal preference. So from the line that I like the least to the line that I like the most. And what I noticed was that for me, the blue line is kind of at the bottom, but it is the line that I featured most on this channel. And if you look at the very top of my list, it is the brown line, and I've barely covered that on this channel. Today, we're gonna correct that. I'm going to take you on a trip on the CTA Brown Line. We're gonna look at some of the different sections of the line, learn a little bit about the history, and then at the end of the video, I'm gonna show you a piece of history that you would probably not expect to find in Chicago, let alone at a train station. Now, the Brown Line runs through the loop, so that's where we'll start the video today. The Brown Line is the third busiest out of all 8 L lines. It was formerly called the Ravenswood Line, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The Brown Line connects the neighborhoods on the north side of the city with the Loop. The Loop, of course, is the name for Chicago's downtown area, but also the name for this piece of infrastructure that our train is currently running on. In fact, the area was named after the tracks. Having opened in the late 1890s, the Loop continues to fulfill the same purpose it did when it was built, to provide common downtown destinations for trains coming from all directions. Today's Loop has 8 stations and is served by 5 of the 8 L lines. Different lines enter and exit the Loop at different points, and the Brown Line is the only one that takes the full loop in a counterclockwise direction. Trains that originate at Kimball will enter the Loop, stop at Washington and Wells, travel all the way around making all stops, and then after Clark and Lake leave the Loop and travel back to Kimball. I'm actually planning on making a separate video about the Loop in the future, so subscribe to Trains Are Awesome if you'd like to see that.
Harold Washington Library, State and Van Buren is next. Doors open on the right at Harold Washington Library, State and Van Buren.
Though the L today is operated by the CTA, a public agency, that wasn't always the case. The tracks that the Brown Line uses, for example, were built by the Northwestern Elevated Railroad. The first train for the Northwestern Elevated ran on December 31st, 1899. However, the next day, the city of Chicago banned them from running trains. The railroad ran a train onto the loop anyways, and rather than chase the train, the police opened the bridge across the Chicago River. But the rogue train operators escaped by running onto the tracks of a different company. Over the next few months, both parties worked out their differences so that by May 1900, the Northwestern Elevated was open for business. Alright, so there are many reasons why I really like the Brown Line. One of them is that I actually did use it a lot because it went close to where I live. But the other one is that it is definitely the most scenic of all the L lines. The Brown Line uses 2600 series and 3200 series trains, the oldest trains in the fleet. You may notice some equipment mounted on the roof of some 3200 series trains. These used to have pantographs back when the Yellow Line used overhead electrification. That ended in 2004, and the trains now run on the Brown Line with their pantographs removed.
State and Lake is next. Doors open on the right at State and Lake. Transfer to Red Line trains at State and Lake. Doors closing.
So we just left Clark and Lake, which is a major interchange station on the loop. We're about to leave the loop and head north, and this is where my favorite section of the Brown Line begins.
Doors open on the right at Merchandise Mart. Your safety is important. If you observe unattended packages, vandalism, or suspicious activity, inform CTA personnel immediately.
If you only ever ride one part of the L system, ride the Brown Line from Clark and Lake to Merchandise Mart. Here's why. Of course, it's impressive how the tracks on the loop carry trains above the street and between the skyscrapers, but in the case of the Brown Line, the views will only get better once we leave the loop and head north. We almost immediately cross over the main stem of the Chicago River. The Brown Line sits on the second level of the Wells Street Bridge. This bridge, like most bridges across the Chicago River, is a drawbridge, meaning that from time to time it does open. Though the views are nice all year round, I would definitely recommend riding this stretch of track on St. Patrick's Day when the river is dyed a bright green. From here until Belmont, the Brown Line shares tracks with the Purple Line Express. The Purple Line only uses these tracks during the weekday rush period, making all local stops, just like the Brown Line does.
Chicago and Franklin is next. In the direction of travel, doors open on the right at Chicago and Franklin. Standing passengers, please do not lean against the doors.
After Merchandise Mart Station, our train snakes through the near north side on a very twisted, elevated viaduct. As we make our way past businesses, apartments, and parks, the Chicago skyline commands our attention. This train is the absolute best way to see the city. As you may have noticed, we are traveling very slowly. These tracks are not only curvy, they're also over a century old. It's not ideal for a transit line, but there is an alternative. In the 1940s, the CTA built the State Street subway. Today, this tunnel is used by Red Line trains, and it connects the south side of Chicago and downtown with the former Northwestern Elevated. Red Line trains run slightly east of us using a straighter underground alignment. This results in some serious time savings. As someone who used to live slightly north of here, I would use the Red Line if I had to get somewhere fast. But whenever I had the time, I would take the Brown Line. Call me a sap, but I never get tired of the scenery. No music, no screens, just me, the window, and the rumble of the tracks. Wow, just editing this makes me a little nostalgic. All the separate companies operating L trains were consolidated into the Chicago Rapid Transit Company in 1924. And then, in 1947, the state took over and formed the Chicago Transit Authority.
Welcome aboard Brown Line Route 406. Armitage is next. Doors open on the right at Armitage. Soliciting and gambling are prohibited on CTA vehicles.
For decades, the CTA named the service between Kimball and the Loop the Ravenswood Line. Interestingly, on weekday evenings and all day on Sunday, there was no Ravenswood service south of Belmont. Then, in 1993, the CTA switched to naming all their lines by color, and the Ravenswood service became the Brown Line. Now, there are several other places in the world that use the color brown on their transit maps. Think of the J and Z trains in New York or the Fukutoshin line in Tokyo, but I really can't think of many other transit lines that are actually called the Brown Line.
This is a Brown Line train to Kimball.
At Armitage Station, our double-track line turns into a quadruple-track line. Right underneath us, the Red Line has just popped out of the State Street subway. Red Line trains don't stop at Armitage, using the middle two tracks to speed past us. Armitage is located in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. Besides some good food and shopping spots right by the station, as well as some beautiful architecture, this is also the closest station to the Lincoln Park Zoo. The Lincoln Park Zoo charges no admission, and its location near Lake Michigan makes it one of my favorite places in the city. And just look at these cute lion cubs. I bet they're all grown up now.
Fullerton is next. Doors open on the left at Fullerton. Transfer to Red Line trains at Fullerton.
Now, Fullerton, as well as Belmont, which is a little bit farther north, are nice stations because they are served by Brown and Red, as well as the Purple Line Express during rush hours, so there's always multiple ways to get where you're going.
Fullerton, also in Lincoln Park, is near the campus of DePaul University. Check out how close some of these houses are to the tracks. Between Fullerton, Diversey, and Wellington stations, many houses and apartments are just inches away from our train, really making the most of that clearance. I've often wondered what it would be like to live in one of those. While Fullerton and Belmont both have two island platforms, allowing for cross-platform transfers between Brown, Purple, and Red Line trains, Diversey and Wellington only have side platforms. This means that they are served only by Brown and Purple Line trains, while the Red Line runs nonstop through this section. Shortly before Belmont, the Purple Line switches to the other track.
Doors closing. Doors closing.
After Belmont, we finally leave the main line and head on to the Ravenswood branch. For well over a century, westbound trains had to cross two busy tracks in order to get onto the branch. This of course led to holdups and delays, so finally in November of 2021, a brand new concrete viaduct was completed to carry the westbound Brown Line over the Red and Purple lines. Now, Brown Line trains can just depart and not have to worry about getting in the way of both north and southbound trains. By the way, I do have Chicago L themed merch available in the Trains Are Awesome store. Click on the link in the description and buy yours today. Initially, the Brown Line remains elevated, traveling through the Lakeview neighborhood. The skyline is far behind us now, but as we continue to travel up between the red brick apartments and the bright green treetops, I'd say that this section of the line continues to have a lot of charm. The first part of the Ravenswood branch, from Belmont to Western stations, opened in May of 1907, and by December of that year, the entire line to Kimball was completed. Trains have been running from the Loop to Kimball ever since, making the Brown Line an exception among the Chicago L, since no part of the line has ever been closed.
Doors closing.
Soon we arrive at Western Station. Remember how way at the beginning of the video I mentioned that we were going to take a look at an interesting historical artifact? Well, we're here.
Alright, Western Station. Well, Western Brown Line at least, the city has so many Western stations. What's special about this place? There's a middle track, which I think is just used for like emergency turnarounds. Doesn't look like it's been used much recently. The neighborhood over here is pretty nice, but to see what makes Western Station truly special, we have to head down to the concourse.
So Western was one of the first stations on the Brown Line to become ADA accessible in the early 1980s, and while that's certainly a noble fact, it's not why we're here. When we walk out of the fare gates, we see a Dunkin', and then over there on the left, that's the slab of the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was a series of physical barriers that communist East Germany built around the capitalist enclave of West Berlin. From 1961, it symbolized how society had been brutally split in two by ideology. For many people, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 marked the beginning of the end of the Cold War. Here at the station, the side with graffiti on it faced West Berlin, and the graffiti is authentic.
So I went to high school in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands you take German classes, and in German we always learned about die Mauer, the Berlin Wall. And so one of the highlights as a teenager was actually being able to go to Berlin and see the wall in itself. Now I'm a Dutch guy living in Chicago, and I can just take the Brown Line to see a piece of the Berlin Wall? What is that about?
In 2008, Germany donated a piece of the Berlin Wall to Chicago to thank Chicago citizens who had been involved with the fall of the Berlin Wall. The city decided to place it at this station since this neighborhood, Lincoln Square, traditionally has a lot of German Americans living there.
So yeah, welcome to Western Station on the CTA Brown Line, where you can see a piece of world history next to the Dunkin' Donuts.
Soliciting and gambling are prohibited on CTA vehicles.
Now that we've seen what we came to see, let's get back on Brown Line train and continue on towards Kimball. You'll notice as we leave Western that our tracks begin to go down. Though the distance between Western and Rockwell is only a quarter of a mile, or about 400 meters long, in this stretch we switch from being an elevated railway to a train running at grade.
This is Rockwell. Doors closing. Francisco is next. Doors open on the left at Francisco. Smoking, littering, and eating are prohibited on CTA vehicles.
And for the remainder of the journey, we remain at grade. Basically, our tracks are just squeezed in between two back alleys. Of course, they are fenced off from the streets, because while trespassing is already insanely dangerous, it is even more of a hazard thanks to the electrified third rail that our train uses.
That's right, here at the very end of the Brown Line, the trains actually run at grade level, and there are level crossings as well. Now, the Brown Line isn't the only L line that has that. Pink, purple, and yellow have railroad crossings and ground level running as well, but worldwide, Chicago is one of the few systems to have that feature, so it's definitely worth checking out. And I just happen to think that the Brown Line ones are some of the best looking. All these ground level stations have artwork, but out of all the ground level stations, I think Francisco is my favorite. One, because there's a big railroad crossing, and two, because it is a beautiful station.
If this narrow path seems daunting, don't worry, there is an accessible way to enter and exit the station by going through the building. When Francisco Station was modernized in 2007, exactly 100 years after it first opened, the CTA invited artist Ellen Harvey to install a mosaic. This piece is made out of hand-cut marble tiles, and it's named Carpet, meant to turn the ramp into an oriental rug.
Imagine you live over here and you get to start your commute every day with a beautiful mosaic like that.
And here we also get the chance to enjoy some more railroad crossing action.
Alright, so one thing about the Brown Line, and this is something that I've noticed since spring of 2023, is sometimes the headways are pretty bad. Like right now, the next train to Kimball leaves in 23 minutes. That's not acceptable. But since the stops are so close together and we're only 2 stops away from Kimball anyways, I think I'm just gonna walk there, show you Kimball Terminal. So a little less than 10 minutes from Francisco, and I've walked to Kimball Yard next to the Kimball station. Now the Kimball Yard is where they keep all the Brown Line trains that are not in service, and it's very compact because it's wedged in between a bunch of apartment buildings and single family homes. Now in the past, Kimball Yard didn't always have the capacity to meet the demand on the Brown Line, and so the CTA would run special trains from Midway on the Orange Line called Brownage trains by fans.
Kimball, being a terminal station, is one of the only stations on the entire L where the tracks are numbered for passengers. In some countries, it's common to do so at every station, but here it's done so that passengers can look at this nifty light-up sign and see which train will depart next. Now I'm on a train headed back to the loop, but this is where we'll end the video for today. I hope you can see why out of all 8 L lines, the Brown Line is my favorite. There's just so much to it. It crosses the river, gives you phenomenal views of the skyline, serves some of Chicago's most charming neighborhoods, has some cool railroad crossings, and now you know that you can even visit a piece of the Berlin Wall on this line. So next time you're in Chicago, take a ride on the Brown Line. Thanks so much for watching today. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Trains Are Awesome, and we'll see you next time.